He's a greedy little thief. There's nothing good about him. Step aside, little girl. I'm going to take my seal back from him.
I'm going to jump straight into this video by first analysing quite possibly my favourite scene in the entire film. But it's not any of the scenes people would typically pick, not tea with Zeniba, not crying in the garden with Haku, not even the iconic train sequence, which is actually a scene that almost overshadows this one. My favourite scene is after the Stink Spirit, where Sen sits on the balcony and looks out across the sea at the moon. It's overshadowed because it's almost like a precursor to the train sequence that even uses the same music. Not that copyright will let me play it. It kind of sets up, I think, everything that later scene will be about. Welcome back to me obsessively analysing all of Spirited Away. This is episode 4 as we go through the film mostly in order. I've linked a playlist for all the videos down below if you want to catch up, but as I said, we're just going to jump straight in with this scene. The most apparent thing here is the change in feeling we get from the previous scene. We left off with Sen succeeding with the Stink Spirit, her first real initiation quest that begins a real shift in the culture of the bathhouse. Suddenly less a cynical, self-serving place than one where people actually show some genuine warmth for each other. Still a long way to go there, but a beginning of it, and that was a moment of triumph and celebration and all this great music. Then the camera pans out and the music starts to die down. However, we can see from the silhouettes people are still celebrating or taking the chance to party on the top floor. Presumably, as Yubaba had earlier announced.
Everyone learn from Sen. Saki's on the house tonight.
You know, this is Sen's triumph, her moment of being accepted by the bathhouse workers, her moment to be sent a stage in all of the celebrations, except she's quietly sitting on her own at the balcony. Even behind her, she's physically distanced from the other workers who are inside below the lamplight, joking and smiling as they eat, while Sen is outside in the darkness, looking troubled about something. Let me build on this before I come to the point though.
Here, I swiped a dumpling for you.
It's a curious choice of words because it again affirms there has been some sort of a party or event going on that Lin has taken the dumplings away from. Or at the very least, she's not saying, here's your dumpling. You know, this isn't one Sen asked her to get or wanted, or that Sen herself had even gone and got one earlier, but simply that Sen has been sitting on her own, removed from the social surroundings until Lin happens to bring one along for her. So why am I making such a thing about such a small and trivial point? I think it's because this moment begins a feeling of understandable anticlimax for Sen. Sure, she succeeded at her trial and became accepted by the bathhouse, as you naturally would when you earn them all free alcohol, but she's still not really part of them. She still doesn't belong, because she doesn't want to be here. They may all be celebrating or quietly talking amongst themselves, but that's not enough for Sen. Sen is looking out past the bathhouse. It's anticlimactic because no matter what she's achieved by this near exact midpoint in the film, she's still stuck here. She's no closer to getting home. She doesn't even have a plan for getting home. And I could even speculate the part of her that did feel good about her accomplishments now feels a little bit guilty because in all of that success, she forgot about her parents. But it's a wonderfully relatable experience to be around an excitable party only to step outside into the quiet to get away and be with your thoughts. And as I say, this parallels the later train sequence where, again, we get long extended shots of Sen deep in thought without really knowing what her thoughts are. There's strength here in how she can calmly sit with them. Sen accepts the food, which was caring of Lin, and shows some attentiveness for her to have even noticed that Sen hadn't eaten. And I think Lin is kind of like a bridge between the workers in the bathhouse and Sen, the kind of space between the two of them. And she lies down to almost perfectly block out the people behind in the background in this middle position again. And I think that distances us even more from the earlier sense of triumph and belonging. And she says,
What a day.
Which I think really brings home the sense of anticlimax. Everything is reduced down to that single statement. This was all just one day of work. The achievement is short-lived because everything resets and a new shift begins tomorrow. How the monotony and endlessness of our jobs can make the successes within it we do experience feel short-lived and almost purposeless. Lin closes her eyes and makes noises of relief to probably enjoy the one moment of peace and pleasure she gets in her entire day. A brief window of contentment before it'll all start again as though today had never even happened. And yet, emphasising this again, Sen is still on a different physical level to everyone else. Lin is relaxed behind the fence where Sen is leaning out beyond it. She's not settling for a moment of peace, which I think is testament to her tireless determination, because a job like this in the bathhouse would be exhausting. It's perhaps the fantasy equivalent of working for Amazon. Paid little and work so tirelessly that you barely have time or energy to even think about breaking away or finding work elsewhere. We see Lin in a moment exclaim,
I've got to get out of this place. Someday I'm getting on that train.
But her eyes are closed and it feels more like a dreamy thing to fantasize over rather than a clear ambition. She's too tired to really take the idea of escape seriously. That's not a criticism to Lin calling her lazy or anything, it's evidence to how relentlessly Yubaba works them, and whilst praise to the fact Sen can remain leaned forwards, symbolically leaning out for her escape, you wonder if she too would become worn down like Lin after too many long, exhausting days.
Lin, have you seen Haku?
Not Haku again. He just disappears sometimes. Rumor has it he runs around doing Yubaba's dirty work.
Does he really?
Which is a question, again, very similar to the one Sen had asked of Haku the previous night. Last night, however, as I talked about in I think episode 2, Sen was asking because she felt unsure of Haku. Can I trust him? I thought he seems nice, but then he was oddly cold when I saw him in the lift. So she asked Lin if there were 2 Hakus, and she told Sen not to trust anything Haku says, and it broke Sen's spirit a little. This time, again, Lin alludes to Haku possibly being a bad guy, only it's left more ambiguous. Sen asks, does he really, but no answer is given. They both just stare off blankly into the dark sky before them. It's perhaps quite fitting that, as the conversation turns to Haku's behaviour, the camera flips so that we do see this impenetrable, uncertain sky, because the point is uncertain. Hence no answers given, and we are given no facial expressions to suggest or sway us in any way. I mean, Sen does trust Haku now. Since the experience in the garden, Lin telling him he does Yubaba's dirty work doesn't leave her broken this time, but we still do have the question. How do we know Haku is a good person? Sure, he's nice to Sen, but we still don't know any motive, and that doesn't mean he isn't cruel to others. What does his dirty work entail? Does it involve turning people into pigs? Who knows? Haku could quite possibly have done some horrible stuff under his service to Yubaba, but we don't know. All we can do is stare off into the darkness. Or we can perhaps choose to trust him. Because at the end of the day, trust is always uncertain. You do never know for sure, otherwise it's not trust, it's simply knowledge. Trust is when you are faced with a question you can never receive a clear answer for, but choose to have faith in one option over the other, and sometimes you do have to settle for that. But a worker announces that it's lights out, so the lamp in the room behind him goes off, and as it does, up comes the stars, the moon, and the music. Artificial light gets replaced with natural light. Light behind them gets replaced with light in front of them, light that exists beyond the confines of the bathhouse. Light out there in the world of escape and dreams and the future. Beautifully symbolic, but also quite hard to pin down. I suppose we could look at this as an answer to the Haku question. You could say that the rising of the light signifies that she is correct to trust him, maybe. Or perhaps it's a point about dreams and escape, hence a very dreamy piano sequence. You dare to dream beyond your surroundings and the small artificial scraps of light Yubaba offers, and you find something much more beautiful. It takes turning away from a bulb to recognise the moonlight. Or perhaps it doesn't matter what it tells us, and we're not supposed to know anyway. Perhaps it's just peace. I like this scene because it gives us space and peace to reflect and consider how much Sen has grown now. And sure, if we're talking about how this precursors the train sequence, then that scene will again give us a moment to reflect on her development, with this slow zoom on Sen's face set against its reflection, who she was set against who she is now. All the trials she will have passed to reach Geneva, and a half enlightenment with the symbolic reward of this hairband. Sen's watching that train now. Soon she'll be taking it. That's not vaguely dreaming about it like Lin with closed eyes, but attentively looking to the train. She will make that trip. And then fittingly, she seems to feel relaxed. The troubled expression and small nibbling at the food turns to smiling at her reward from the river spirit. A hopeful twinkle in her eyes as she takes a much larger bite. I like this scene for that too. Without clearly telling us anything, we see her sit with her troubled thoughts for a moment before reaching a place of resolution and calm within them. We don't need to know exactly what's going on inside her brain. To just see that process of reflection and resolution happening is enough. Anyway, she sniffs at her reward from the trial, curious about it, then takes a bite. It tastes horrible and the scene ends comically there. The reward is not the same nourishing food that helps her find her strength like the dumpling in her other hand is. We'll later learn is perhaps the opposite of nourishing food, a purging agent that expels Haku's curse. One for ingesting and the other for jesting.
Ingest.
That's later in the film though. Here we change scene to the very quiet and deserted bathhouse. I love how ghostly and blue it looks, and sound-wise, the total silence of everything here except the frog's footsteps is really striking. He's sneaking down after the party to try and find some leftover gold from the river spirit, which we can see as greed, but we can also see as desperation. Having just had a scene where an exhausted Lin exclaimed about how she'd one day wish to get away from here, the frog no doubt feels the same, but as we'll later learn, Koenji's had to work pretty much endlessly just to afford a one-way train ticket. So of course the frog wants gold. Is that his greed to search for it, or Yubaba's greed to hoard it all and leave the rest of them in a state so desperate as this? Maybe a bit of both, but No-Face is here and he drops the gold for the frog, who at once shouts the rules.
What do you think you're doing? You're not allowed in there. The bath's closed.
The problem here, I think, is the frog's better judgment overrules him. He's curious at first about the gold,
Are you giving them to me?
questioning to understand. However, No-Face shakes more gold in a deliberately taunting, quite dehumanizing way, or defroggedizing, and then he's lost to it. Entranced by the allure, he questions no further and suffers the consequences. So in that sense, I personally don't think the frog's mistake is greed exactly. It's allowing this desire to overrule his better judgment. That's very similar to greed, but I think there is a faint distinction. The same thing occurs with the foreman though.
I know that voice.
He has enough sense to spot something isn't right, however gold distracts him and overrules his judgment just the same.
Why don't you wake everyone up?
We then cut to a dream sequence in which Sen goes to feed the river spirit's gift to her parents, only she can no longer tell which ones they are. Simple moment that A, foreshadows her later test of having to guess which of Yubaba's pigs are her parents, B, parallels the pig-like greediness we're about to see from the bathhouse workers, them reaching out to No-Face the way the pigs reach out to Sen here. And C, it's just a meaningful, emotional point. We shouldn't forget Sen began this film as a very dependent child who was probably never really away from her parents for long at all, so all this stretch of time without them is a big thing, and she'll miss them, yes, but there's also the worry, what if I forget them? What if so much would have changed when we do see each other again that it'll feel weird? When you're still very young and not yet used to being away from people, trusting that they are still there as they always were when you get back, that is a big worry. And I guess similar to how she feels about Lily. It's a nightmare that wakes her up without the massive cliche spring forwards and scream, I like that. Everybody else was woken up to feed No-Face where she slept through it. How she slept through it, God knows, but it shows the gold isn't one of her priorities. She goes out to the balcony again to reflect on her dream, only she realises the boiler is lit, so work is happening when she bumps into Lin.
I was just coming to wake you up. Look, it's real gold. There's a new guest here who's loaded.
It's again kind of Lin to come back for Sen, but Sen isn't bothered. It's made clear Sen isn't needed down there. She's not ordered as part of her job to help feed No-Face right now, so instead she thinks of Haku. However, she does ask in their brief exchange,
Who is the guest? best.
Oh, who cares? Come on before Yubaba wakes up.
Yubaba isn't actually here at the moment, but obviously they didn't go and alert her because they fear she'd take all the gold for herself, but it's the idea of who cares who the guest is. That's crucial to this whole scene with No-Face. Who cares anything about him, just that he's rich? They even greet him later.
Hello, rich man.
I mostly talked about No-Face last time, but at this point in the film we see him eating exorbitant amounts of food. We've repeatedly seen how food has been a nourishing agent, ingested to receive goodness, essentially, and so a figure literally absent of identity, practically see-through as Chihiro first was before she ate. It's unsurprising he turns to food. Ingesting first the frog to try and claim his identity to find some semblance of a voice, and now huge overeating that we can look at in exactly the same way, feeling symbolically empty. And there's probably also the hoped for, filling, nourishing, identity providing feel that No-Face thinks he might get from their attention. Because he commands attention now, using his gold to make sure he's finally noticed, where before he was pretty much invisible around here. Only that's quite sad when you think about it, because he's technically just as invisible, if not more than he ever was. Because it's not No-Face himself they see, just his gold. Who cares who the guest is, only that he's rich. The food gives him a brief symbolic illusion of being filled, but it doesn't heal his emotional emptiness. The gold gets him attention but not connection, not truly seen, except of course for Sen, who careers round the corner on her way to Haku.
Thank you for helping me earlier.
Powerful when you think of it that way. Sen is the only person who actually treats No-Face like a living being. You know, when you're in a place where you do feel lonely, these sort of small interactions, even from strangers out in the world, can feel huge. And so if he wasn't sure before, it now becomes apparent to No-Face that all his food, all these workers around him amount to nothing more than confirming the emptiness he already felt. He turns to Sen instead now as his ray of sunlight and offers her a mound of gold. The issue, of course, is that No-Face still misunderstands. The thing that feels good is the connection and care and acknowledgement Sen offers him, not Sen herself as an object. Ingesting Sen wouldn't give him any more of that, nor would buying Sen, because you can't buy connection or empathy. What he desires is the thing Sen already offers freely, to treat him as a living being. He's just too starved of it to quite trust it. He wants to effectively hold on to her as though this kind of treatment she offers is something concrete you can obtain and trap close so that it never leaves you. In seeking Sen, he may be seeking a different object to the food or attention, but in the way he views it and approaches it, she is still just an object. And so politely as she does it, and as desperate as No-Face might be, Sen has to refuse.
I'm sorry, but I'm in a really big hurry.
I love the sadness of this moment. How he drops the gold and the crowd block him in as they scramble for it, and he just looks on at Sen with this deep, longing sadness. No-Face is incredibly lonely. Believing now that Sen is the answer to all his loneliness, he turns angry towards the crowd when he hears the foreman remark,
"You'll have to excuse the little girl, she's just a human."
No-Face turns on them. And now the crowd do see him, acknowledge him, just not as something good. The only way he can get them to really notice his presence is to see him as a monster, which, just personally because of my job, is an idea that I find quite moving. Knowing children in difficult family environments can do the exact same thing. The only way to have their presence noticed is to be seen as a monster. That's a tangent though. We're going to jump back now to the scene that happens in the middle of all this. When Lin first told Sen about the rich man, she said she was going to look for Haku, so instead of going to No-Face, Sen goes outside. Let's jump back to that. To set the scene for Haku's arrival, we have a short moment on the balcony very similar to last night. The distant bustle and excitement of all the other workers inside, set against the calm and quiet with Sen outside. separating herself from the others, where Lin again is a kind of bridge and halfway point between the two. It's a very short moment of calm, but I think it's important to highlight just how lost Sen still is. There is no plan or idea whatsoever for how to save her parents and get home. Wondering where Haku is, the only person who might seem able to help, she laments,
You better get here before I forget what my parents look like.
Perhaps you can even say some of her childish, mopey side comes out in this moment. As much as Sen has achieved a great deal on her own, she still always relied on Haku's guidance. She could endure being persistent with Yubaba, working hard and everything, because she trusted Haku's guidance. There was some sense that if she did those things, she would be closer to saving her parents. That gave her hope, and so now she's searching for what the next step is. What will Haku advise her to do next? Except now is not the time for Haku's guidance, but for Sen to take the lead. Haku is in trouble. These paper birds, it seems, are based on the shikigami of Japanese folklore. No idea if I pronounced that correctly, and I'd be interested if anyone knows the sort of meaning we can draw from them, other than a kind of utilising spiritual energy to add movement and power to these paper birds. I suppose we could see that as a positive, that where Yubaba tricks Haku or amasses tons of workers to do her bidding in difficult conditions, Zeniba uses inanimate objects. Either way, this is our first indirect introduction to Zeniba, and what we're shown is that she's someone dangerous who is trying to kill Haku. She's an antagonist right now, not that we know it's her yet. Sen calls to him, so he charges through into the room behind her, where she attempts to barricade the door, and fearing the attacks, she then realises it's just paper that seems to lose its power upon impact. Which could mean that impact does just finish them, or maybe that Yubaba has spells on the bathhouse to stop things like this getting in, or maybe they've just felt their work is done and Haku is already badly bleeding. Meaningfully, I suppose it just makes me think about the power of fear and how in the panic of a moment the paper can make this loud, grating, scary noise, and Sen can be afraid, except in facing up to the fear we discover it has a lot less power over us than we first thought.
It's just paper.
As much as Sen attempts to comfort him, there's clear worry in her voice.
Hold still. Those paper things are gone now. You're going to be alright.
She has no idea how to help him, and there's no one to guide her on what to do. She seems hesitant to approach, which is unsurprising with how fierce Haku is looking. He's like a dog when hurt that snarls and bites at anyone who might want to come near and help. Perhaps with a moment to think, she'd approach and try, gathering some blankets or clothes from the rack behind to bandage him up or something, which I reckon a lot of other films would do in this situation, and the problem would probably be resolved almost instantly, but not here. It's actually a long time in movie minutes before Haku has hope of being saved, and I think that adds to the sense of threat. Haku feels there's only one person that has the power to save him now, and that's Yubaba, so he charges off to attempt reaching her office. And Sen, still clueless as to exactly how she can help, doesn't give up regardless. She charges off to follow him and comes face to face with No-Face, then escapes out the window. With, by the way, the one paper bird still able to move, sticking to her back. I suppose this one can still move because this one is the one Zeniba herself is projected through, but I don't know. I've talked a lot about scenes paralleling other scenes this episode, and here we get another one where Sen's dangerous parkour, I guess, parallels her descending the staircase before. I tend to think most stories do have a lot of parallels in them that occur quite naturally because any development always comes in cycles. And I know character arcs always get talked about in a very straightforward problem, transition, growth type scenario, but I think realistically the arc would look a bit more like problem, transition, growth that overcomes the problem in part, but then cycling back and facing a similar problem again in life, perhaps on a bigger scale, like you've reached level 2 or something. Only now you have the experience stored in the back of your mind of how you overcame this sort of scenario before, so you struggle forwards and develop again, then again and again until it really does bed in and you reach a new place of real growth. I mean, I know I've put that simply, but that's character development really. It's not enough to overcome things once most of the time, but to overcome them enough that it begins to feel natural. Like, you can learn to ride a bike, but you still be nervous when you first go out into the field or roads or wherever until you've ridden it enough that you don't really have to even think about it anymore. I think this film is full of so many cycles that it becomes incredibly difficult to pin them all down. Passing through the tunnel, through Kamaji's boiler room, through the dark forest, crossing the stream, crossing the bridge, crossing the ocean, facing up to scary Kamaji, to Yubaba, to the stink spirit, to No-Face, to Zeniba, and finding some sense of humanity beneath. Persevering with hard work, persevering and persevering. And so on. I'd be interested to hear other parallels and cycles in the comments, but what we're seeing here, I suppose, is a dangerous, scary athletic challenge. The stairs terrified her, and she discovered that wincing and taking it slowly wasn't quite so effective as just going for it, which is a lesson that makes her better able to manage the challenge this time. She braces herself, then runs. You know what I like about this shot? It shows us very clearly how grand and clean and bright Yubaba's section of the tower is, then how dark and run down the rest below is by comparison. I doubt any pipes on Yubaba's level would break like this one does. Structurally, it's not the best idea to have the lower sections of the tower as the weakest points, but symbolically it's a fitting statement about the poor holding up the exorbitant wealth of the bathhouse owner. Sen climbs that career ladder anyway. I'm being flippant there, I don't think that's the point. But the paper bird nudges her attention to the returning Yubaba as a means to hurry Sen up. Though exhausted, she keeps going, where the paper helps her break in through a window. This is Zeniba, of course, relying on Sen to lead her straight to Haku, but let's not forget also that Zeniba observes Sen through all this, and we'll see directly how much she cares for Haku, and how much she'll go through just to reach him. A fittingly decadent bathroom where you'll notice it's designed so that everything is so much bigger than Sen. The bath, the towels are all huge compared to her, which is probably because they're for Bo, but it also emotionally adds to the threat of this scene. Like, there's no objective reason to feel danger yet as an audience. We're not explicitly told to feel afraid. However, making Sen so tiny in comparison to her surroundings naturally transmits that feeling to us in a subtle way. Sen doesn't know where she's going, only that she's got to find Haku, and it leads her straight into this playroom. Again, a brilliantly unsettling environment, just not for how huge everything is, or for the music, or this camera looking down on Sen, but the imagery itself. I think there's always something unsettling about taking nice, innocent things like children's toys, then just making the tiniest things appear slightly off. Seeing the smiling sun from upside down, having a giant, scary-looking pterodactyl be the one and only toy hanging in the air, the wheels on this car being twisted, this toy clown collapsed like it's dead, or exhausted, or passed out drunk in the armchair. It's technically not at all off, because any playroom would have broken toys, and some of them will be scarier animals rather than all nice ones, but seeing it all like this in a gigantic, seemingly deserted playroom somehow adds to a sense of trepidation. Also a nod to Kiki's delivery service there, and I like the wallpaper shows a giant castle on the one side and then a tiny little cabin on the other, which I think just nicely reflects Yubaba's and Zeniba's homes. Sen overhears Yubaba on the phone being told about No-Face, which she immediately understands, and she says she'll come down to resolve. She blames the workers' greed for causing the mess, but again, it's technically Yubaba's greed that forces them into such desperation for gold to begin with, or at least contributes to it. Anyway, Yubaba is then coming back, so Sen hides while Yubaba searches for her son, Bo. I don't think I need to say much about this scene because I feel like the meaning is pretty clear. Bo has lived a very sheltered life in a playroom beneath a cocoon of cushions. Yubaba has of course both spoiled him and overprotected him to the extent this room is pretty much his entire life. He's been taught to be afraid of the outside world to the extent he thinks
You'll get sick if you go outside.
And I think his design as being such a gigantic baby is also an obvious metaphor for this point. The big spoiled baby who was probably overfed by Yubaba's overcare for him. And we also have to wonder if he is actually a baby. He could be much older, but simply Yubaba wants to keep her son as this precious child that's fully dependent on her to such a degree that she treats him like he is still that vulnerable and young. Judging by his speech, I'd guess he is technically older.
Play with me or I'll break your arm. That hurt!
Bo is clearly very lonely in a world where only he and sometimes his mum exists, but he fears germs as this symbol for the outside world until Sen shows him her bloodied hand. Similar to Sen panicking at the paper birds attacking her, I suppose, scary as it might be, suddenly the threat seems very little as Bo discovers he hasn't suddenly died from whatever violent death he probably imagined. He gets up and leaves the safety of his room to follow Sen. Sen, of course, has run out after Haku, where the three heads appear to be pushing him down a dust chute or furnace or something. The positioning of it makes it look like they're eating Haku at first though, which is quite a nice touch. Sen tries to protect Haku, and when Bo comes out, he threatens,
If you don't play with me, I'll cry.
a threat which has no doubt worked all his life in a very contained world. This would, of course, cause major issues because Yubaba might hear it and come back or something. However, Zeniba, Yubaba's twin sister, intervenes.
What a spoiled brat. Shut your big mouth. You're a bit of a porker, aren't you?
Which is cruel, obviously, and adds to the picture we're building of Zeniba as a villain. It's quite weird for a grown woman to be bullying a child, really, especially over things that's not his fault. It's how his mum raised him. He isn't aware of a different world. Zeniba clearly does have a bitter side in that, and in her generally messing up everything in Yubaba's office. Obviously, it's good for Bo to learn crying doesn't always get what you want. Sometimes boundaries have to be firm, but she teaches that in quite a harsh way, in a way that ultimately I don't think would teach Bo anything at all, because he'd just conclude Zeniba is a mean person. Zeniba turns her attention to Haku.
What do you want with Haku? He's badly hurt.
Too bad. He stole my solid gold seal. It's magic and powerful, and I want it back.
This, of course, is the dirty work Haku has been doing for Yubaba, stealing Zeniba's gold seal, so what Lin said was right. At first, Sen argues,
Haku wouldn't steal. He's a good person.
but he has stolen. It's a fact. We'll see the seal in a moment. Zeniba even argues,
Do you know why he became my sister's apprentice? To steal her magic secret?
so in that sense, Sen's fears are confirmed. Haku both does Yubaba's dirty work and is a thief, not objectively the good person she imagined him to be. Morality, however, isn't that straightforward, obviously, and regardless, Sen continues to trust him. Sen doesn't deny Zeniba's claims, but she also doesn't agree with the idea that
He's a greedy little thief. There's nothing good about him.
Interestingly, Zeniba wants Sen to get out of the way before she takes Haku, which I think suggests she doesn't want to hurt Sen. There's three ways of interpreting this, I think, with the context of how nice Zeniba seems later, in my opinion. One is that she believes Haku is a genuinely bad person and the right-hand man of a sister she clearly holds quite a petty grudge with, and so she wants to punish or possibly kill Haku, but not to hurt anyone she doesn't have issue with, such as Sen. And in fact, she's observed Sen's goodness already in the extreme she'll go to just to help Haku, so she might not want to harm her. The second possibly is that she doesn't want to harm Haku at all, or even regard him as a bad person, but A, just wants a seal, and B, is testing Sen's faith in him. And the third possibility is that Zeniba's not in her right mind without her solid gold seal. A seal that becomes meaningful when you remember a seal is how you sign your name, so in stealing this, Yubaba is taking Zeniba's name away, just as she did to Sen or Haku, and also kind of Zeniba's voice too, as it's needed for signing letters and is a symbol of that just as much as it is your name. So in taking this, it kind of removes the very thing that makes Zeniba clearly distinct and different from her twin sister. Perhaps without it, she does act more like Yubaba until it is returned, where she suddenly seems nicer. I don't know, those are 3 possibilities. Haku senses a chance, however, and manages the exhausted act of cutting through the paper that Zanib is projected into. Then it's unclear whether he deliberately falls down the chute or just collapses. In their fall, Sen grabs Haku by the horns where she immediately sees a flash of a past memory, and very nicely this shot of what I imagine are some sort of coal spirits or something to do with the boiler room. Falling towards them is animated a bit like stars moving to signify some kind of dawning comprehension in Sen's mind, if that makes sense. The spirits reach out to Sen and Haku as they fall, however. Personally, I take these spirits to be death, perhaps some greater death beyond the spirit world itself, but in classic Miyazaki fashion, it's incredibly ambiguous. If anyone has any ideas about them, I'd be interested. Haku is just about able to fly them to safety, which means returning again to the lowest point of the bathhouse. What is worth keeping in mind about this scene is that Bo, in his form as the mouse or hamster, whatever it is, and the birds, the soot spirits, and Koenji are all present and observing everything for what is basically a scene where Sen takes the lead now. They observe, and what they see from her has an effect on them. In crashing through, Koenji at first warns, "Be careful, stay back!" But naturally her one thought is caring for Haku, so she charges forwards, but again feels lost as to exactly how she can help. Koenji now approaches and observes,
"It looks like he's bleeding from the inside."
And as soon as she hears inside, she thinks of the river spirit's gift, which in many ways is a strange first thought, but A, she wants to try something, and as she suggests,
maybe it'll help.
B, she of course tasted it herself before and maybe was able to experience something of a purging effect to it, we don't know. C, most importantly, it came from the river spirit in an act of cleansing, an act of purging him from all his waste, so symbolically it makes sense the gift would provide that same kind of cleansing effect for others. So being told here there's internal bleeding and Koenji even supposing
maybe he swallowed something
would in fact make this then quite a logical thing to try. And so suddenly that moment during the Moonlight sequence in which Sen reflects on the river spirit's gift and then tastes it is less a comedic end to the reflective scene than actually important setup. Because we now know that Haku won't want to eat this, we know Sen knows he won't want to because of its taste. Therefore, she's quite ready to force him in a way kind of similar to feeding medicine to a pet that doesn't want it. It's not very nice, but there is love between Sen and Haku in this scene. How attentive and persistent she is to help him, even when his pain makes him snarl and bite at her the same way we do metaphorically snarl and bite at our own loved ones from time to time when we feel pain. Sen does not let that stop her care. Then out comes the solid gold seal and the black slug that we later learn is how Yubaba controls Haku. A slug that is given some good personality for its short appearance. Koenji fearfully hurries her to get it, which she does in a sort of panic before freezing at the moment of impact. Suddenly some sense of guilt or regret about if she should have done that. Even some of that shocked guilt to her face as Koenji tells her,
"Those things are bad luck,"
and frees her of its evil. Again though, we notice in this scene that the soot spirits, Bo, the bird, Koenji are all watching Sen and Haku closely. They watch as we watch, because what this scene is, I think, is the culmination of Sen and Haku's love or their care for each other. This is where it really becomes apparent, and whilst the soot spirits and Bo in particular have seen and been part of the adventure of falling down a chute, flying, seeing Haku be saved, an evil slug killed, God knows the sheer amount of adventure that must feel to Bo, hence him and the soot spirits acting it out again, but what it also is an experience of love. Experiencing it third hand in seeing it between Sen and Haku, how devotedly she cares for him. Not the sort of spoiling care Bo is used to either, and I think just having the moment where Koenji talks and provides backstory exposition about Haku, showing Bo act out what just happened during that exposition is a great way to add interest to the shots. You know, I always love it when exposition isn't just delivered with images of two people standing there talking, but character is added, a character developing moment for Bow, who we recognise has already come to greatly respect Sen and aspire to be something a little more like her. But what is Komaji's exposition?
Poor Haku. He's had it hard ever since he got here. He just showed up out of nowhere, just like you did. But he got mixed up with Yubaba and took a job as her apprentice. I warned him that it was too dangerous. Just quit. Go back home, I told him. But he said for some reason he had no home to return to. Once Yubaba got control over him, his face turned pale and his eyes turned steely. He's never been the same.
Sen's trust in him has paid off, as we understand now, sort of. We understand enough. Haku went through something quite similar to Sen, and he likely took a job as her apprentice, hoping her magical skill, perhaps learning some himself, might enable him to find a way home. We don't know why he can't get home yet, or the reasoning behind it, but we understand the motivations. A young boy with no home to return to, travelling to a new culture and being taken advantage of by someone powerful. Someone that A, uses power to control him, hence his steely eyes and everything, that will soon notice change following the Black Slug's death, but B, how I think working a job like that for someone like that without any hope of an end in sight, how it seems to corrode something of your soul into that more steely state, metaphorically speaking. I don't think Sen's mind was on all that information as Komaji spoke, however. I get the sense she was instead thinking over how to help Haku still, because the very second Komaji finishes, she says,
"What if I take the gold seal back to Zeniba? I could give back the seal and apologize to her for Haku. Can you tell me where Zeniba lives?"
Which is fittingly where the music returns. Sen's love for Haku again shining through and leaving Komaji a little taken aback in admiration.
You'd go to Zeniba's?
It's an act you can see one of two ways, either incredibly naive of Sen to think just going back and apologising to a dangerous witch can resolve everything, or it's incredibly caring, because it's not an act you would ever do for another person unless you did care for them deeply. So I think just in making that journey, her love for Haku will shine through very clearly for all to see. To clarify as well, I obviously haven't meant love in a romantic sense. I should have said that earlier. Right now though, the love touches Komaji first. Seeing something as pure as that, any ordinary person would naturally want to see it maintained, because sometimes spotting love within others isn't always a product for envy. Not when it's authentic, sometimes just seeing that in others gives us a little warmth. And so Komaji then offers a similar act of great care that cannot be underestimated. He gives Sen a one-way train ticket that he's been saving for 40 years. A train ticket we already know means a great deal, again, because of the Moonlight sequence. Because of Lin's great dream to one day be on that train, because of how ethereal it appears and how long Sen spends staring out after it. It's just nice how much important setup there actually is in that very calm and mostly silent scene. And Lin enters into the middle of this scene, again paralleling our last boiler room scene where she did the exact same. She's here to tell Sen about No-Face's destruction and that Yubaba wants to see her, which is interesting, because we'd half forgotten about No-Face until Lin reminds us, and his mention doesn't impress any sense of the danger or horror we might expect of someone who's been eating people. You know, there's no real dread, but still the same calm piano music that Lin's entrance has failed to interrupt, just as she fails to interrupt Sen's conversation with Komaji.
Found it! Here it is, Sen.
Hey, we're busy, Boiler Man.
You can use this.
And that's interesting because as much as Lin describes No-Face as a monster, the lack of impact here, even after we last saw him devouring people, tells us we're not supposed to see him as a monster. We're supposed to see him as Sen does. After her conversation with Komaji, she calmly agrees to visit Yubaba now.
Sen, what about No-Face?
I'll take care of that now.
She's not worried or fearful of No-Face because I think she does recognise his humanity. and she's had a connection with him. People are a lot less scary when you can see their hearts, so dealing with No-Face instead becomes a difficult but essential duty. Just as she'd earlier sighed without any real complaint but acceptance.
I guess my parents will have to wait.
How mature Sen has grown now, how much leadership she shows, how much responsibility she takes is a wonder. Again, all lessons for Bo in particular, who watches on. And Lin, oblivious to everything she's seeing before her, asks,
What's going on?
Something you wouldn't recognize. It's called love.
Love, the perfect concluding words to this entire scene. When I first watched this film, I didn't like that line because it felt like a forced way of making that typical cheesy point about love that most kid films tend to make. Nowadays I like the line because it's not actually forced at all. It's exactly what we have seen building and revealing itself this entire scene. Love, care, kindness, and selflessness for another being. Koenji says that because it's what he's seen and been so touched by in this moment. Exactly 3/4 of the way into the film now as well, love begins to take over and will kind of flood through the rest of the film and the setting. All of that scary darkness of the bathhouse and this world increasingly peels away into very cosy scenes of love that are earned in this film. When I talk about how Sen's goodness can infect the hearts of the workers and reshape the culture of the bathhouse, this is a great scene for that. A scene which ends at the mention of love. Nothing else needs to be said as we cut to a scene with No-Face, which will again show us exactly how much Sen has grown, but we'll come to how she handles that next time. This feels like a fitting place to stop. I suspect it will just be 1 or 2 more episodes of this before the film is done. Probably 2, because I know in particular there's a ton I want to say about the Zeniba scene. But for now, let's end on a small thought to take away. Sometimes I feel love and care aren't earned but discovered within ourselves. It can appear like the most natural thing in the world, where it takes pain too overwhelming to make us turn away from that love, where suddenly we don't have the headspace to care for others or consider them at all. Consistently, this has been a film about seemingly bad people being cared for by Sen, and I think that does come down to her trust and confidence that there is goodness within them. That Haku is more than just a greedy little thief, which are all points I have laboured before, I know, but compare that to Zeniba's treatment of Bo, who is bullied for being big and spoiled. Doesn't he deserve love too? You know, I think there's a habit we can have as people to kind of judge and decide who deserves our care and who doesn't, and an idea that we are somehow teaching someone bad a lesson if we deny them our care, that, you know, that maybe Bo will learn to not be spoiled if we treat him horribly and give him just desserts. It feeds our own satisfaction, I think, really, in the sort of way you see Dr. Phil shouts at people, but it's Sen who enables Bo to develop. She's very kind to him and already describes him as a friend.
Who are those guys?
I picked up some new friends. See?
She doesn't tell Bo he's a bad person with these bad faults that he needs to somehow change. She simply, very naturally gives him space to show some better traits. Space on a journey to show confidence and independence in his own small way, helping him to recognise those things about himself. Much more effective to give people hope that they can grow than to scare them with fear that they haven't. Anyway, that's all I'll say today. As usual, I have no idea when the next episode will be. I suspect quite a while, but I cannot stress enough I will finish this series. Do not worry about that. Please like the video if you enjoyed it though, it helps. Comment your thoughts, what I've missed, what I got wrong, subscribe if you fancy, or even support me on Patreon, but otherwise, hopefully see you next time. As ever, a special thank you goes to Devin, Kestrel, Arwen, Stephen Legg, Janice McMahon, Luke Hoare, Shichu Kaba, Michael Gallagher, Samara Salsi, Sharikoff2814, Joshua C. Follier, Chad Bramwell, Incomplete Sentience, Emily Tarras and Nicholas Patrick. Thank you.